going to be speaking about language paper 2, and we're going to be looking particularly at the question that compares writers' viewpoints and perspectives. For the AQA exam, this question is question 4, which is worth 16 marks. And for the Edexcel exam, the language paper 2, this question is your question 7B, which is worth 14 marks. As you already know, the two texts that you'll be getting in your language paper 2 would be one that's based on an extract from a 20th or a 21st century text, and the other one would be a 19th century text. So you would need to compare the writer's viewpoints, and you would need to identify how they convey their viewpoints. So we're going to have a look just now at what we actually mean by that. So when we are comparing writers' perspectives and viewpoints, what we're actually looking at and what we're trying to find out and identify is how writers feel, what their ideas are, what sort of thoughts and emotions are going through their minds. And of course, we need to also look at what their particular viewpoints are on certain topics and themes. This comes under the broad heading of perspectives. Now, guys, as you would know, this question tests your skills of assessment objective 3 in language paper 2, where you're comparing writers' ideas and perspectives. But what is also very important for this assessment objective is for you to demonstrate how writers actually convey those perspectives and those ideas. Now, we'll talk about the how just now in more detail, but really the how is referring to the methods that writers use. Now, remember, the methods are not just your linguistic devices and your structural devices. There are other features and aspects and methods which also include things like tone, gender, historical context, social and political context, for example. And we'll come to that just now. Right. In the mark scheme, it says, in order for you to get, a full mark answer, or close to a full mark answer, so AQA, your top band or your top level for this question is an answer that would consist of about 13 to 16 marks. You would need to compare ideas and perspectives in a very perceptive way. The same with you Edexcel students. Your top band is actually level 5, and you would need to get 12 to 14 marks to get, almost full marks for this question. So both AQA and Edexcel students, you need to compare ideas and perspectives in a very perceptive, exploratory, and detailed way that is quite meaningful as well. Then you've got to make sure what is really important is how you actually analyze the methods that writers use to convey these ideas and perspectives. You've got to mention your quotations. Your quotations are your textual references. This is your evidence, obviously. So analyzing the evidence, analyzing the techniques or the methods is going to take you to the top answer. It'll take you to an answer that is much more exploratory, and of course an answer that's close to full marks. But of course, in your analysis, you really need to show the writer's viewpoint and the writer's perspective, and how the writers have used very particular devices and methods to convey their viewpoints and perspectives. You don't need to speak about the effect on the reader. Remember, this exam is about the writer and the writer's viewpoints and how they convey their viewpoints. So it's not about how the reader feels, but however, you do need to show that you understand how the writer feels. How writers convey feelings in text, some of the ways in which they convey their perspectives and their viewpoints in text. Firstly, gender. Why would gender be a way that would help you identify how writers feel or what their perspective on a certain issue is? Sometimes you'll have females writing an article that they feel quite strongly about, and their perspective might be very different from a male who writes, on the same issue, writes an article on the same issue. So look at gender, because gender might in fact play a part in indicating to you what the perspective of the writer is. Next, look at setting. Setting can very, very often give you an indication of how a writer might feel and what his perspective is. For example, if a writer is sitting, in a paradise-like setting, like the one that you just see now, he probably is feeling quite happy, pleased with himself, very relaxed perhaps, and relieved that he's finally on holiday perhaps. However, if a writer has written about his expedition, a mountain climbing expedition, and he struggles during his expedition, it's quite possible that he would feel quite challenged. He would feel quite vulnerable because he's right on the top of a peak of a mountain range, feeling quite maybe exhilarated, but at the same time feeling quite scared because it is quite a dangerous setting, right? So setting does play an important part in helping you to understand and identify how writers might feel and what their viewpoint is. And of course, look at the thoughts and emotions. Again, thoughts and emotions range, from happiness to sadness to, feeling vulnerable, disappointed, petrified, terrified, dejected. There's thousands and thousands of emotions. Of course, the emotions and the thoughts come from the experiences that they've had or that they've lived through. Look at the narrative perspective. The narrative voice will give you some sort of idea or clue as to how the writers feel. For example, the first person narrative would be very different in many ways to the third person narrative, because remember, the first person narrative gives the reader much more intimate understanding of the experiences that the writer is having, or a much more intimate sort of understanding of the thoughts and feelings of a writer. On the other hand, the third person narrative would give the reader a much more omniscient, sort of all-observing understanding of the events of the text, and therefore you're able to preempt things that are going on, and there's detachment between the reader and the writer, which might give you a few clues about how the writer feels, what his perspective on the issue is. Have a look at the narrative perspective. Look at the historical context. Look at the social, economic, and the political context. It will give you lots of clues. So, for example, Nelson Mandela giving a speech to the country after he was elected president, for example, will give you a huge clue about how he feels at that time, taking into consideration that just 27 years before that key moment that he became president, he was in prison as a political prisoner, having very different viewpoints. So have a look at the historical context, have a look at the political context. That would give you clues about how a writer might view freedom, how a writer might view a certain theme, how he might feel about that particular topic. Then, of course, try and identify the tone and the mood and the atmosphere in writing through the words, through the thoughts, through the feelings, right? Is it all gloom and doom? Is it a fearful sort of mood that is being depicted, and why? What is going on? That would give you also an idea about the writer's viewpoints and perspectives. Then, of course, language and structure, our old friend. You already had a lot of practice about how to analyze language and how to analyze structure. Look for structural devices. For example, a flashback. Maybe a writer is conveying and relating experiences that he had as a soldier during the First World War, or maybe as a prisoner during the Second World War, maybe as a victim of a terrible, crime that took place. You would find structural devices there in the text that will give you clues about how he feels. Maybe long sentences, maybe short sentences. Have a look. What does it depict? What does it show? Then have a look at also words. Emotive language, like in this case, brutal, quite an emotive adjective, suggesting something quite intense that might have taken place in a writer's life. Look at the experience. What does it suggest? How does he feel? Is he feeling quite, upset? Is he quite disappointed? Have a look at that, and that will give you clues. To summarize then, guys, this is what we actually look for. We look for the feelings and perspectives. For example, as we see here, angry, upset, sad, just a few to mention only: confused, impatient, excited, agitated, right? There's a few here for you: disappointed, disgusted, fearful, anxious, happy, excited, exhilarated. But the question is, how are these conveyed? And some of the methods that they use include, as we just been through just now, language, linguistic devices, structural devices, imagery. Look how aspects such as suspense and tension. Look at your linguistic devices like adverbs and adjectives. Look for irony and sarcasm. Is the writer having a very sarcastic tone? Is he very cynical about something? Is he humorous? Look at the atmosphere and tone. And then, of course, look at the context, the historical context. Look at the technical language that a writer might use. For example, scientific language, medical language. Have a look at that. That would give you clues about his perspective and his viewpoint. All right, now we're going to have a look at an example. And if you have a look at these pictures now, you would see it's very, very current. So I've taken two pictures. One of on the left-hand side is of, our current coronavirus situation. We can see NHS staff here in their big, in their suits, their protective equipment because of the virus and the fact that it is so infectious. And this, of course, is in 2020. And then on the right-hand side, it's a picture that pertains to the bubonic plague of 1665. And here, very different, same theme, same sort of topic about disease, right? Different historical context, as you can see, but perhaps similar feelings of fear, similar thoughts of, how to curb the pandemic, how to contain the virus. And the pictures tell us different stories, as you can see. So there are similarities. And if you look at on the right hand side, the way the doctor is dressed, very similar in many ways to our NHS workers, but different, right? At that time, in terms of the historical context, we did not have social media. We did not have the technology that we have today. We did not have the information that we have today, right? We have all of that today, and yet we are still feeling vulnerable because we cannot understand fully, all the information about this virus. So let's go on and have a look at the two extracts. Right, so this extract on the left-hand side is your source A on the coronavirus, and this extract is from the newspaper last week, right? And then source B is an extract from one of the diaries from someone who actually captured some of his thoughts on the bubonic plague at that time. So I'm going to read. And as I read, I'd like you to follow, and I'd like you to try and identify what the perspectives of both writers would be. And whilst you're doing that, you'll be able to also see if there's any similarities or differences. So the question here is, how do the writers convey their different perspectives and viewpoints about the diseases in the extracts? So source A, the coronavirus. And the disease continues to spread. That is an extraordinary achievement for a spiky ball of genetic material coated in fatty chemicals called lipids, and which measures 80 billionths of a meter in diameter. Humanity has been brought low by a very humble assailant. Right, so source B, the bubonic plague. Those who remained alive would watch their loved ones deteriorate, powerless to act against a disease that killed with ruthless efficiency. Their bodies would be enveloped by angry red circular blotches found on the skin. Large pus-filled sacs would be found lurking under the armpit and near the groin. the victim's breath would putrefy as the disease intensified, causing everyone in close proximity to feel repulsed. The victim was robbed of a peaceful sleep as the pain started to infiltrate their veins. Okay, as you can see, different ways in which the plague or the virus in both diseases were understood and perceived. If you look at source A, we can see that there's a lot of description, right? We can see some visual description like spiky ball of genetic material coated in fatty chemicals. We've got some visual adjectives there. We've also got some technical language, as you can see, which measures 80 billionths of a meter in diameter, right? And then on the other hand, we have source B about the bubonic plague. Here we can see it's more an extract that describes how the victims actually responded to the virus and the impact that it had on the victims. And again, here we can see that the writer is quite descriptive, using lots of visual sensory language to explain how the disease affected its victims. So let's now go to the next slide, where I'm going to be analyzing how you go about writing the answer. So what I've been doing with my students is this. I've been using a technique that I call W feta, right? For you to remember, W feta, feta cheese, W feta, right? You do know that you need to write 4 paragraphs in your answer to try and, get the full marks. And of course, 4 beautifully analyzed and developed and explored paragraphs. But what I've done here is to show you why this works with the students. I've had a lot of success. My students have had a lot of success with using this very, very simple technique to try and structure their answer and structure each paragraph. So first they need to know we're talking about the writer and we're talking about the writer's feelings. So they need to identify the writer's feelings straight away. That means, what's the perspective? What's his viewpoint? What's his thoughts? What his ideas? Then we look at the evidence. Where's the evidence that actually shows the feelings? Where's the evidence that portrays the thoughts and the ideas of the writer? What are the quotations that you can see that actually conveys these thoughts and these ideas? Then we need to look at the techniques that the writer uses. Techniques here means methods, guys. It's the same that's in the mark scheme, methods. Right, so what are the linguistic devices? What are the structural devices? What's the tone? What's the atmosphere? What's the historical context? What's the setting? So all of this is going to give you some clue and some sort of idea. Is there sarcastic tone and attitude? Is there a tone of fear? Is there a tone of feeling vulnerable, for example? Is there a feeling of vulnerability, right? And then, of course, the analysis is really about explaining how all of these methods here and all of the evidence here actually convey the writer's viewpoint. It's not about how you feel, it's about how the writer feels, the writer's perspectives, and the writer's viewpoints. Okay, so that's that. Right, now let's have a look at how do we use feta to write our paragraph that conveys the writer's viewpoints. Firstly, in source A, I've just highlighted here for you the evidence that I think is telling us something about how the writer feels. For example, if he says it's an extraordinary achievement, it's almost as if he's being quite sarcastic, right? He's being quite almost, to an extent a bit humorous and trying to sort of, relate his intrigue and his sort of, interest and fascination about this new disease. Okay, I've also highlighted here, humanity has been brought low by a very humble assailant. If you look here, humble assailant, it's almost like an oxymoron. An assailant is someone or something here. In this case, the disease is being personified, as you can see, as a criminal, right? But humble assailant. Very, very interesting way of describing the virus. But let's see how we do it using FETA. Okay, like I said to you, it's the writer's feelings, the evidence, the technique, and then the analysis. So this is what I've written, and I've color-coded it for you so you can actually see. We've got firstly the writer's feelings in blue. Then I've got the technique or the method in red. I've got the evidence highlighted in yellow. And then I've got a bit of analysis in purple, as you can see. So let me read that for you. The writer in source A is clearly surprised at how infectious the corona virus disease actually is. Right? He conveys his surprise and astonishment through the use of the intensifier when he says extraordinary achievement. Now, the intensifier is actually the word extraordinary, okay, because it emphasizes how powerful this spiky ball of genetic material is, this virus is, in other words. When he describes the his tone is almost sarcastic, I'm saying, when he describes the infectious nature of this virus as an achievement, which suggests how baffled and confused, but also we could say intrigued he is at the severity and the intensity and the power that the virus has, despite it being so tiny in size. And we can embed a quotation here, which is 80 billionths of a meter in diameter. Then I go on to say that furthermore, the writer in source A is aware, now look in blue, I've got his feelings, is aware of the severity of the virus and feels that everyone is at the mercy of the virus. Okay, he conveys the sense of helplessness through his use of the personification in humanity has been brought low by a very humble assailant, which suggests that he feels that humanity is powerless against the attack of the virus as he realizes how brutal and deadly the virus is. We can even go on to say that he perhaps perceives the virus as being almost like a tyrant, like a powerful master that has everyone at his mercy. Because as we know, it is very infectious, it is very dangerous, and we've had many victims so far to date. Okay, now let us go to the second source, which is your source B. Again, we're going to look at how we can use W FETA, that means writer's feelings, the evidence, the methods, the techniques that they use, and how we can analyze to show how the techniques and evidence actually convey the writer's feelings, perspectives, viewpoints, and attitudes. Again here, right? I've already read the text to you. Let's have a look at how I've gone about to analyze it and to convey the writer's perspectives in a sort of succinct way. Similarly, the writer in source B. Now, I've used similarly here, as you can see. Now, similarly is a discourse marker. You need to remember your discourse markers like similarly, in the same way, likewise, or if you're showing a contrasting point of view, it's going to be in contrast. However, on the other hand, contrary to, please remember these discourse markers to show and introduce a new point of view in this question, in this answer. Right. Similarly, the writer in source B also conveys his realization that families are at the mercy of the plague as they are powerless to combat the disease. Okay, and powerless is an embedded quotation that's highlighted in yellow for you. Through the use of the emotive adjective powerless, the writer acknowledges that the disease is a brutal and callous attack on its victims. Now I'm trying to analyze, I'm trying to explain what powerless actually means, right? Because remember, we have the word ruthless here. Ruthless is very brutal. He reinforces this through the use of the adjectival phrase ruthless efficiency, which indicates his awareness of its severity and seriousness, almost like a carefully calculated and callous assault on its victims. Right? Again, the purple bit here is the analysis. The purple bit here is my explanation and analysis. I've highlighted the evidence in yellow for you, and I've also got the methods in red. And I'm sure there's many, many more methods here. I've just got a few that I've analyzed just for the sake of this video to help you prepare and learn the technique. In contrast, there's my discourse marker. To the writer in source A, I'm bringing a different point of view now. The writer in source B demonstrates his disgust and his repulsion when he states that the victim's breath would putrefy, causing everyone to feel repulsed. There's my evidence. His use of the emotive verb putrefy suggests that the writer himself was repulsed, indicating that he found the diseased person revolting like the others and felt sickened by the experience. That's his perspective again. So, guys, to reiterate, what we have done today is to compare their ideas, the writer's ideas and perspectives. We've analyzed how they've used methods, different methods, to actually convey their ideas and perspectives. We've selected some quotations that will help us to explain the writer's ideas and perspectives, and we've shown a detailed understanding of the different ideas in both texts. We haven't spoken about the effect on the reader because we don't need to. We just need to show that we understand what their perspective is. Okay, so I hope that you've understood and you've learned something from this session and from this video, and that it would be able to help you as you now prepare for your Year 11 mocks and your summer exams coming up. Thank you. I do hope that you found this lesson useful today, guys. Please like, subscribe, and share. And if there's any specific topic you would like help on, do leave a comment below. Thanks for watching.